Welcome to another episode of Distory with Kate and Kirk. My name is Kirk from walruscarp.com, and tonight we're going to lose our mine train and talk a little bit about the ends of Mine Train through Nature's Wonderland, concept art for, or concepts of Big Thunder, and of course, Thunder Mesa. And with me, as always, is the well-documented, well-researched, multiple published, and still writing author, Kate the Disney Cicerone. Kate, how we doing this evening?
I'm doing really great. I'm so excited to research Big Thunder. We're actually getting to the crux of this series. But before we do, we have some really interesting lost concepts from Marc Davis to talk about. I'm really excited to dig into this episode because it's a little bit of a transition between Mine Train and Big Thunder, and it kind of tells us where Big Thunder Mountain came from as a concept. So we're not going to get into Big Thunder fully, but we are going to understand where this concept of a runaway mine train came from. So I'm very excited to talk about that. But before we can get to Big Thunder, we have to talk about the demise of the mine train through Nature's Wonderland, which is a thing, unfortunately. So ridership had really just been declining for years on this. And when the pack mules closed in 1973, the whole ride just kind of didn't feel the same. It lost some of its kinetic energy, and it became just a peaceful train ride through, the living desert and all the areas that we've talked about in Beaver Valley. But the only exciting part really was going through the Rainbow Caverns. And so it wasn't a thrill ride. And this is starting to get into the 70s when thrill rides are starting to become the thing, and that people are looking for that in a theme park. And instead we have this kind of nostalgic train ride, which I love. So don't get me wrong, I love the Mine Train through Nature's Wonderland. But this is just the reality of what happened. So the ride had a hard time competing with rides that were even in Disneyland, like Pirates of the Caribbean and the Haunted Mansion. And so they asked Marc Davis to look at the attraction and see if there is any way to plus it or make it better. So this is about 1975. Marc Davis dreamed up some new concepts to make it more exciting alongside Albertino. So if you guys know Albertino as an Imagineer, he's kind of, Big Al is kind of sort of named after him for the Country Bear Jamboree. That's where we get the name Big Al. But one of the concepts was a Four Seasons or America's Wilderness concept. And this was made in 1961. But he kind of added some things to it. So you can see here, this is a seasonal overlay that was pitched again in 1976. So Marc Davis said, I designed another one for them, Nature's Wonderland, but all done indoors. It was enclosed in a building and had 4 areas. So you'd start out on ground level, and the first area would be summertime, and everything would be bright and have summer feeling with summer animals and so on. And then you'd go to the next area, you'd climb up in height, and you'd have autumn. You'd have the leaves all colored in the animals of that period, and I wanted to change the temperature in each of these places. This is Marc Davis saying this. Then you'd turn into the third one, and that was the highest you'd go. That would be winter. You drop the temperature down, and you'd have the beaver pond in the winter and the deer stripping bark off the trees. Then all of a sudden you'd come into another area, and now you're going downhill, and it's springtime. You'd have cute baby animals and wildflowers and all that kind of thing. And from there, you'd go back down to where you started. So this giant, massive indoor theater. So if you're thinking about, Pirates is being developed, or already has been developed. And so he's thinking, what could we put in a giant show building like Haunted Mansion, like Pirates of the Caribbean, right? So what could we do if we extended the set in this really unique way of creating and controlling our environment and controlling the show that way? So he's like, we can control the temperature, we can control the lighting, we can, so that was the concept behind this. That was a really interesting one. And
yeah, I love I love just the concept of seeing the different seasons. Yes, doing weather and temperature. Anytime that you can combine sensations and attractions always pluses them, in my opinion. So for example, take a modern day experience with Disneyland and Snow White's Enchanted Wish. That got plussed using not only projections and things that they used in Seven Dwarfs Mine Train here in Walt Disney World, but the sense, it's so understated how aroma or temperature make a massive difference. Like even when you went on Spider-Man, when you were in Universal, like it's a projection screen ride that happens to have moving pieces, but then they use actual flame, they use actual water, they use actual like heated areas that just blow hot air on you. They use vibration. Like each one of those little elements creates like, I feel like a level of immersion. Like even speaking of, you know, Swiss Family Robinson Treehouse, that originally being proposed to potentially change colors with the seasons. Now, monumental undertaking for them to actually do so, physically basically impossible, but I love the idea of it, you know? Yeah. And I think guests, especially if you're a frequenter of the park, this would have given a lot of life to essentially a dying attraction because it wasn't thrilling.
Which is hard to say about that, but it's true. That's essentially what it was becoming. And it's interesting because Marc Davis also said he was going to revamp the Rainbow Ridge area and make it more of like a log cabin kind of feel. I think it was called Last Chance Lodge. And on top of it, it would have had the globe logo for True Life Adventures, if you've ever seen their logo. And then would have Nature's Wonderland above it. So really tying back in a very obvious way the IP of the documentaries, the True Life Adventure documentaries, to the attractions so that it was visible from the outside. This is what you're going to get in this ride to try to entice more people to go on it, which I think is really interesting.
Do we want to talk about what they were going to do with the Rainbow Caverns area to kind of plus that?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so there's lots of concept art in here, so I'll speak a little bit and then I'll showcase probably things that I don't know that Kate can kind of fill in here. But essentially, they wanted to create kind of an earthquake scenario. So as you're leaving like the tumbling rocks part, you know, the ones that are like balancing and kind of like they look like they're going to fall over on top of you out in the living desert, well, you would enter into Earthquake Canyon into this like shaky mine looking kind of with like cross beams and overlays, and then they wanted it so that the ceilings and the walls would move on rollers. And as a quote, this was going to be an earthquake and a kind of runaway train thing where you separate from the locomotive. You'd roll one way and then it goes another, and then finally you join back up. Well, this was way before Indiana Jones, although it was that kind of thing, but you never got around to it. And then they showcase potentially having like a bear getting all excited and scary, have a bunch of bats, and then last but not least, a lava flow.
Can we go back to Earthquake Canyon for a second?
Yeah, well, we can go back to the setup of this.
Yeah.
I have an image of that too.
Earthquake Canyon, the mine cars were actually going to tip from side to side in the Balancing Rock Canyon. And this is such a critical piece of what we're going to see later in Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. If those of you have ridden Big Thunder, maybe think about if there is a place where your railroad car actually tips from side to side. The rocks would jiggle, the cars rocked, and they had sound effects. Then Marc Davis said, then I had a hot idea where they'd have these spinning rocks. And I thought, gee, that's a great idea. Why not rock the train when it goes through here and make earthquake sounds? It was a stupid idea because we've had an earthquake and we don't like it. And you'd scare the HE double hockey sticks out of people. Well, we hadn't had any earthquakes here in a long time. So he justifies his idea by like, well, we haven't had one in a while, so it's okay. He's like, this maybe isn't a great idea, which is ironic because earthquakes do come back in this attraction's history.
Yeah.
But then that earthquake again makes that runaway train thing kind of happen. That's the reason you separate from that train. So the earthquake continues in the caverns. The engine separates from the train. And then the bear, do you have a picture of the bear? Is the bear popping out is so similar to the Yeti on the Matterhorn that pops out at you. Very, very similar effect. And that was added in 1978 to the Matterhorn. So I think that they took this concept and they dressed it in a Yeti and they put it on the Matterhorn when they plussed the Matterhorn. They also have those elves and the bats fluttering and squeaking overhead. They lit up with strobe lights. But again, these are all concepts that very much come back around in Imagineering for future attractions, which I think is...
Yeah, listen, I think most people who are listening to this has no understanding unless this is nostalgia for you and you grew up with Mine Train. You guys all know this from the current editions of Big Thunder. So it's cool, like we're actually getting to that point where you can see and make connections to how all of the previous undertakings and attractions are leading to our big grand finale, which will eventually get us to Big Thunder. Like we're getting there, and you're making some good connections.
Yeah, all of these things are so important to kind of put together in that bigger picture of Big Thunder, so that when we get to Big Thunder, you're going to be like, that's where that came from, and that gives you all that context. Because nothing that happens in Imagineering, it happens in a vacuum, and a lot of it is recycled from older ideas, right? It's really interesting because the idea of this runaway mine train that like disconnects from things, you know, like it's so reminiscent of Indiana Jones. So I think that's why Marc Davis kind of like clarified this was long before Indiana Jones. And you saw all the lava and everything. It very much reminds you of the Indiana Jones attraction in Disneyland today, where you're going over, you know, giant pools of lava. So I feel like Marc Davis, there's so many of these ideas from Marc Davis that Imagineering just kind of like picked back up later. And that's something that Tony Baxter said is a very quote that he says often, where he says, ideas don't die at Imagineering. They just get put on the shelf for a while and picked up later. So these ideas to me look so much like these other attractions that we have now. So which makes me think that, you know, it's like Marc Davis kind of had a hand in some of those, which makes me happy.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the old adage, you don't have to pay them if they're not there anymore. That's not a real quote from anybody, but
it's awful. I do have a couple of other concepts that I ran into for Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland before we retire it here. You remember that bear from the last episode that gets his head stuck in a log trying to like look for honey?
I barely remember. Yeah, no, I know. I got the picture of it.
So that one was one that was made in 1975 when he was trying to figure out how to make this better so that they can revamp Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland. So the bear is basically like ripping open a log, a stump, and like looking for honey inside it. Very Winnie the Pooh-esque. And then I found one that was marmots popping up on Cascade Peak. And I was like, well, we've already seen marmots. And I'm like, oh no, this is like a whole different concept. And it's the welcoming committee for the riverboat coming back to dock. And it's a whole bunch of little marmots. And they look like this, just like the other mechanism, but they're over on Cascade Peak, kind of near Big Thunder Falls instead. So basically they were just like, let's just add a whole bunch of extra marmots. That will solve this problem.
As the Big Lebowski would say, nice marmot.
Put a marmot on it. That's how you fix any attraction that's going under. Just add more.
Not gonna lie, that's a good t-shirt. I'm gonna make a t-shirt with a marmot on it. It'll sell well.
There was also he did a sketch of a bellowing elk. If you've ever heard elk bellow, it's wild.
Well, you were telling me that you won a gold medal prize for elk bellowing in high school, right? So can you just share some of your elk bellowing? Don't be so modest. You won a medal. It was crazy. It was in the local Oregonian press. It was wild. So without further ado, here, I'll set it up for you.
I'm not doing this.
The elk bellowing of Kate.
No, I'm not doing that. I thought about it for a half second. I'm like, no, I'm not doing it.
Dude, I thought I was setting you up so good. I thought it was going to happen.
So my family and I stayed in Yellowstone on the side of the park that has kind of like the stair step. I don't remember what they're called, like the geysers that look like stair steps. And there is elk everywhere there. And so we have stayed in this like little cabin that had a little front porch. And the bull elk have these massive antlers, and they're super dangerous, but they would go through town just like bellowing out all the time. And then so they're just like walking past our front porch, like we can't go to our car because he's just like right there. And they're everywhere in town, and it's a wild experience. So if you ever get to go to Yellowstone and experience the bellowing elk,
it's so cool. What was that sound though like?
I'm not going to do it.
You can't hurt me for trying, can't blame me.
I'd have to go back and see if I can find it.
I feel like it would sound like this. Oh.
No, it's like almost like a whistling sound. Have you heard? Okay, so yeah,
the reason why I say it is because it kind of gives me the vibe of Polar Express caribou.
That's exactly what it sounds like. It sounds like the caribou on the Polar Express. So to give you a little bit of context, I was about to say that. They're very, very kind of like loud and like screechy, but it echoes. It's super loud. Anyway, that's the elk bellowing. It was going to have a little bit of limited animation where his head would move up while he bellows. So Mammoth Hot Springs. Thank you. That's the name of it. Yes. Thank you, Ashley. I think that might be all I have for Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland, unless you have anything else.
Nah, let's blow this popsicle stand. It's dead anyway.
So the last train to travel by Cascade Peak ran on New Year's Day in 1977, and then the ride was retired. But in order to continue this story, we can't stay in Disneyland. We have to go over to Walt Disney World. Specifically...
Wait, hang on, time out. I just have pictures of abandoned train. You can't leave yet, sorry. It was a great transition, but not yet. I have images. I thought you were going to say a little bit more, but you didn't.
No.
I just found look how cool this is. Some of the stuff is in storage. They clearly had
so
it on,
what they did was
pallets.
They took they used to have that train on display next to the Rivers of America. And then they took it, and I believe it's at the Carolwood Barn has it, because they're restoring it from, I don't know how far along they are in that project, but that's what it looked like when it was on display.
This was when it was on stage, it looked like this?
Mm-hmm. They basically just parked it, and then it just deteriorated over the years. So my understanding is, I don't know how far along, if they've maybe finished that project by now, but they took it and they took it out of Disneyland and they brought it to Carolwood Barn, and they couldn't salvage any of the wood because the wood was pretty much just rotted away. So my understanding is they're trying to restore it, or at least maybe they have.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that wood is beat up.
Yeah. So the last thing I saw about it is they were raising funds to restore it, and they were trying to find original pieces for things, and but they would have to redo all the wood on it. So anyway, that's where that train ended up, if you're ever wondering where it went. And then Kirk's also showing you a little piece of the track that used to come out of that's in Bear Country, the tunnel that goes out of Bear Country where the trestle used to be.
Wait, hang on. When we were in Disneyland, that was the piece you showed me, was the Trestle Bridge area?
No. So you saw, so this is where the Trestle Bridge area is now. And this is where those little jumping fish mechanisms are sometimes, if you can catch them. And so the trestle doesn't exist anymore. It was starting to fall down, so they took it down for safety. So this is a close-up of that tunnel now. It's pretty much getting covered with ivy. But the one that you saw that I showed you, Kirk, is actually this one, and it's the marmot one. This is where the marmots hung out.
Ah.
Yeah. So there's a little tunnel that was the Beaver Valley Tunnel with the marmots that went. This is where you go through it, and then you would see Big Thunder Falls on the other side.
I have to admit, this means a lot more to me now than it did when you showed it to me excitedly.
Right?
Because without context, I was like, what?
Yeah, I know. And you're like, I don't care. I wanted to.
I'm like, dude, I'm trying to ride Indiana Jones. Can you get out of the way?
See, you're going to have to come back to Disneyland eventually, because there's going to be more stuff you're going to be like, oh, no, I get it now. Yeah, so the other things that you can look for, I mentioned this last time, that Cascade Peak, that went down in 1998. So Cascade Peak actually lasted for quite a while. This is kind of near the end of its life, what it looked like, with no Big Thunder Falls running. And then they dismantled it. So I have a picture of them kind of taking it down. I'm glad you stopped me, because I forgot I had all of these. So good job, Kirk.
Hang on. At 9:12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on February 9th, 2024, Kate Grasso said, "Thank you, Kirk." I just want this to be on the record. Don't strike this from the record. I know you control that, but don't do it.
You can also see how the rock structure was starting to crumble and fall apart as well, which is why they removed Cascade Peak. They basically just hadn't maintained it. It was just sitting there. So this is what it looks like today. If you go by it on the Rivers of America, you can still see between those two rocks is where Big Thunder Falls used to be, but the train tracks are still there. So if you want to go see the train tracks for Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland, just go take a ride on the Columbia or the Mark Twain, and you'll be able to see a lot of them.
Dumb question is Cascade Peak still there, like in a way?
No, it's gone.
It's like the whole thing's gone.
See, this is a picture of it. That's where Cascade Peak used to be.
Oh, okay.
And I actually have a side-by-side. Yeah, of where here exactly is what it looked like side by side. It's back there.
Hate that.
There.
I hate that I can't see it. Yeah, I'm bummed that I never got to ride this attraction because this is like such an up my alley, slow, quirky, audio animatronics. I'm in. This would have been a ride challenge. If it was around now, I would be back on a flight for a ride challenge.
It's one of my biggest, saddest things that I never got to experience this ride in person. It's very sad. But I don't know. I'm hoping that, we're still going to run into a couple of the critters around places, though. One of the ones that you'll see a whole bunch of them if you go on the Disneyland Railroad, because the mountain lion is there on the Disneyland Railroad, as are a whole bunch of the little animals as well. So some of them also show back up in Big Thunder, but we'll get to those ones later. They're either on the Rivers of America or the Disneyland Railroad. There's a whole bunch of the critters that were in Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland. So you can still see a lot of the animals, just not exactly the same way. Are we ready to move on from Nature's Wonderland?
Thank you.
Okay. So, like I said, the last Nature's Wonderland mine train to travel by Cascade Peak ran on New Year's Day in 1977. But we can't stay in Disneyland. We have to go to Walt Disney World for the rest of this big
Wait, Kate, I've got one more thing. I'm just kidding.
No, we need to go over to Disney World because
let's do it, baby. Bring me. I'm coming home.
I'm done
coming home.
trying to transition.
Tell the world that I'm coming home. Let's talk about the good one. Let's do it.
So we're going to talk about Thunder Mesa, which is sadly one of the great lost attractions of Walt Disney World. And we have mentioned this on Distory before because we talked about the Western River Expedition. We did an entire episode on that attraction. But we're going to talk more specifically about Thunder Mesa and the mine train concept for it. So Thunder Mesa was a project that was slated to open sometime around 1974. It was going to open with Walt Disney World originally in 1971, but then they had a whole bunch of budget issues, and so they moved it to phase 2 of Walt Disney World's opening. There was a lot of things that got moved to phase 2. Those things we've talked about in the Jungle Cruise before, like the punching gorilla with the alligator. That was also a phase 2 project. You can see here in the original model for Walt Disney World, you can see that giant red rock structure that is in the back there. That is Thunder Mesa. And then Kirk's showing you the model of what it would have looked like. This would have been the largest show building ever built in a Disney park. The purpose of it was to hide the massive show building of Western River Expedition. So this would have been 225 feet at its peak. So to give you that context, that would have been the tallest structure in Walt Disney World. Cinderella Castle is 187 feet tall, and Everest, which is currently the tallest, is 199.5 feet. So it's just shy of, having to put lights on top for the airplanes and whatnot. But this would have blown that out of the water at 225. So it would have been massive. The mountain also would have had a flume ride with canoes, which we've mentioned before, basically turned into Splash Mountain later as it got separated out from this area. It also had cliff dwellings. Remember, Kirk, how we talked about cliff dwellings before with Mesa Verde?
Yeah, dude, it was so cool, man. Again, how do they get up there?
You can see them there. Little cliff dwellings.
I will tell you, I know we're not going to talk about it in full, but Western River Expedition, it's the one that got away.
Yeah.
This is the one that you would have regrets for the rest of your life. You know what, dude? Dear Disney, I know you want to do more Frontierland in Walt Disney World. I know you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to. You got the blueprint right here.
and a model and all of the
Just
things.
build it, bro. People will lose their minds.
Yeah. Western River Expedition, just to touch on it for a very brief moment, it was basically going to be the Pirates of the Caribbean, but done with cowboys and Indians, the Native Americans, as we would say now. But that was the plan. It was going to be a Western style kind of Pirates of the Caribbean. And it was amazing. It was so well done and well thought out, but it had all kinds of audio animatronics. It had like over 300 audio animatronics in it, which made it very, very, very expensive to create. I will get a little bit more into that in a moment, but I will also say that the Thunder Mesa, something that people don't know is I get people that ask me all the time why Magic Kingdom doesn't have a Blue Bayou restaurant. And the reason for that is that Thunder Mesa was going to have its own style of Blue Bayou restaurant called Mesa Terrace. So it was where diners could watch the boat splash down from the end of Western River Expedition. And they could also have the runaway mine train go through the town, which is here you can see the town a little bit like Rainbow Ridge, quite honestly. But my understanding is the load area was all set at Sunset. So it's going to be an old West town over in Sunset. Here you can see some of the tracks for this. And there's also going to be walking trails up here. And then the canoes. So it's going to be intertwined a lot like the idea for Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland, Rainbow Caverns, where all these different attractions were kind of interwoven with each other, very much borrowed from that area of Disneyland. So in this was going to be a runaway mine train ride. It was not called Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. That came much later. But this was a concept that was conceived by Marc Davis. It would have had added a kinetic energy to the backdrop of Frontierland, and you'd load in the railroad platform by a cove next to a gigantic waterfall. They would cross through the Mesa town, and then the runaway train would go on top of the Mesa. They would see the painted desert, the saguaro cactus forest, and it was basically similar to the Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland, except it would be a little faster. That was the concept for it. So how did it become Big Thunder from this? Well, Tony Baxter got involved because he was eventually put in charge of this train component, but he wasn't at first. He was just a model maker at WED. But he wasn't really happy with the mine train ride concept. He said it has no story, no theme. It's just a train rolling across a hillside, nothing more. So he didn't like that the storytelling wasn't very concrete. And he also didn't like that it wasn't very thrilling until later in the ride. So the first part of the ride was pretty dull, in his opinion. He began to wonder what would happen if they moved the train on the top and place it in front of the mountain instead. So this is a quote from Tony Baxter. He said, "Coming back in 1972 from Florida, I was out of work. If you weren't working on the pirate ride, you had nothing to do." Because remember, Pirates of the Caribbean ended up opening in 1973, so it was later than everything else because they never planned to build it in Walt Disney World. So I thought, what if I were able to develop a plan to build the runaway train ride that crisscrossed the front of the Western River facade separately from the costly Western River ride itself? We could put the runaway train in now and put the Western River ride adjacent to it when the timing was right for such a complex project, because Western River was super expensive, right? So he did a sketch of what it would be like on his own. This is what the sketch he made for what the train ride would look just by itself without any of the Thunder Mesa, the giant Thunder Mesa, without the Western River Expedition. He kind of like pitched it with this. And it's interesting because I heard him say once that if you want to sell an idea, use a painting. Don't use a model, because paintings are just more, people connect more with them, more like viscerally able for us to connect with them when they're paintings. So that's something that Imagineering still does to this day, even if they're not physical paintings, they're things that they create. And then this sketch became then this painting of Big Thunder for Walt Disney World. Remember, we're still in Walt Disney World with this.
That painting reminds me of when they did the refurb at Walt Disney World for Big Thunder, and they put in a watercolor that looks very similar to that.
It could have been this one, because this was the original intention for Walt Disney World, was it for it to look like this. He built then a model based on that sketch and that painting, which looks like this. So if you see there in the back of it is a giant show building and is the facade, so to speak, of Thunder Mesa, but done in a very different way. So the train ride is up front and Western River Expedition is in the back. Baxter, he pitched the runaway train to executives with his idea of a bat-infested cave, an earthquake, and a more thrilling ride experience starting at the beginning of the ride. And he said that this sort of broke the impasse that they were having about budget. I just said separate the elements out so you could do the train ride first. And I did a little 20th scale model, which you see here, that showed where the Western River building would attach to it using a more simplified facade. So management saw this and they're like, that looks great. Let's do that. But then they said the Western River Expedition was redundant. And so they shelved that project. Card Walker told Baxter to start work on a standalone e-ticket runaway train thrill ride independent of Marc Davis's project. And so Tony's mine train roller coaster project got the green light that was based on Marc Davis's concept, but it was greenlit for Disneyland instead of Walt Disney World first, basically because Space Mountain kind of came in there in the middle. So Big Thunder Mountain kind of got put on the shelf for a little bit because of Space Mountain, because everybody was really into space at the time because of Star Wars and things like that. Big Thunder Mountain really allowed management to authorize a smaller project without making a go, no-go decision on Western River Expedition. But they eventually just said, like, we can't afford this. We're just going to do the mine train. So you can imagine how Marc Davis would feel about this, right?
This is where Marc Davis's opinion of the company shifted.
Yeah. I think he was heartbroken that specifically this attraction never got built.
I think
they did to it.
All right, just an opinion, no facts or anything. If Walt was alive, what do you think would have happened?
I don't think he would let money make the decision. I think he would go on the art and
That's
the show.
the correct answer. He would have said, we will figure it out. They would have put some crazy sponsor up against it. They would not have done a fiscal decision. And especially what I think is interesting about this is they got the financing to purchase all of the lands through Disney World because of the success and the cash flow of the theme park. So if they were going to ask a bank, and again, their interest rates were so low that they were able to, the interest rates were less than 3%. So they weren't even keeping up with inflation. It's free money on a cash flowing asset that you don't even have to pay back. You just have to make interest payments on. It's not even a question in terms of business. You do this. Debt is not a scary thing when it's in your favor and you know that something is going to be good. I think that happens in a lot of projects, right? Where logic and reasoning can destroy creativity and excitement. And if you know an idea is good enough, it's worth pursuing, whatever the cost.
Yeah, it's that balance of practicality and creativity, and how do you balance them both? And I don't think in Disney's history, it's always been balanced the correct way. Even in Disney's time, sometimes he leaned a little bit too far in the creativity, and that's how he ended up bankrupt eating beans in his house with no shoes, So, but I think he learned from some of that. And I think throughout the years, he was just like, well, we'll figure it out financially. It doesn't mean that it wasn't scary at times. I know there was a time when Walt Disney was building Disneyland, and they were about halfway through the budget for Disneyland. They'd blown halfway through the money that was allocated to it. And they built these big wooden lookouts in Disneyland that they put cameras on and stuff to watch the progress. That's how we have all that great footage of Disneyland being built. He was up there and he was saying, half the money is gone and I have nothing to show for it. Nothing. And they said that it was Harper Goff that was with him, and he was just crying. He was tears on his face. He had nothing, because at that point, all they paid for was to move land and move infrastructure, and you couldn't see anything because it was all plumbing and electrical. All the things were underground. So it was literally just a giant pad of dirt, and they'd spent half of the money he had and there was nothing built. And how impossible did that look at that time? But they found a way. They partnered with ABC. They found a whole bunch of sponsors. They figured out a way to make it happen, because that's what you do when an idea is good, to your point.
Yeah, I think, far too often people are scared and they're not willing to risk it. you know? And
Yeah.
honestly, it's not that bad. Last night on my drive home, I was eating beans in a burrito with no shoes on. It's totally cool, you know? So, like, don't be afraid.
We need to put that in context because I'm not sure everybody on our podcast knows what happened was. Do you want to tell them what you did this week, Kirk?
No, I'd actually rather them just hear this and go, "What on the world?" No, the quick and short is over the last 3 days, I did the equivalent height of Mount Everest by repeatedly climbing Swiss Family Treehouse 382 times, and the only thing I wanted afterwards was Taco Bell. So yeah, I had a bean burrito with no shoes on because it felt good to not have my shoes on. So there you go. But moving on.
But yeah, I think that if you really want to do something, you will find a way to make it happen. And there's no excuse that will stop you from doing it. And I think that that probably was what broke Marc Davis's heart in this, is he knew what that was like, being with Walt Disney and then having no Walt Disney there and having different voices run the show and being like, nope, that costs too much money. Put it on the chopping block. We're not doing that. You know, very different culture for sure. So what Western River Expedition gets shelved because of the cost of adding pirates to the park. And also they're like, this looks too similar to the pirates we already have. Why would we have two attractions that look the same? Even though Marc Davis designed Pirates, he took out all the things he loved about Western River from Pirates so that it wouldn't be duplicated. They're just like, sorry, this looks too much like Pirates. So if you ever wondered why you don't go up the up waterfall, why you don't have a ghostly grotto, that was partially budget, but also partially because it was going to be in Western River Expedition. If you ever wondered why Pirates is just not as good in Walt Disney World, it's because Marc Davis was going to make a ride that was even better with all those amazing elements in that ride. So big, huge loss for Walt Disney World. Marc Davis. Very
All right,
sad
let's
about it.
hang on, audience. I don't like anything I just heard. That was a lot of shade. That's not unequivocal. I will say you guys don't like scents on your rides, so you complain and say you don't like smoke, you don't like fruity, you don't like cannons or fire. So we've removed them from Big Thunder. You've removed them from Pirates because of guest complaints. But at Walt Disney World, we still got them.
You can barely see your Wicked Wench pirate ship.
Where are we
You can't
doing?
even see it because it's so foggy there. It's just so different. It's just, yeah, you can't see anything. And then there's, like, you don't have...
It's called Bombardment Bay. It's not called, oh, this is a pretty ship alley. It's like there's literally cannons firing at will.
It's just so foggy. You can't even see what's going on. You can't see the scene. I think Walt Disney would not like that staging of it in Walt Disney World. I think, honestly, I think that there are people who were involved with some of the original Imagineers that created Disneyland that are still in control in Disneyland. And that's what makes it so much more true to the story and Walt's vision than Disney World. They kind of like do their own thing over there. So that's why it's that way.
The problem for Walt would have been, as he got older, he would have continually fallen asleep at just earlier parts of Pirates because it's so long. He'd be like, after like the 10-minute mark, he's out for another 11 minutes.
No. Okay. But hear me out. Walt Disney, what he wanted for Pirates didn't actually happen because, well, I'm sorry, we're going on a Pirates tangent. It's just happening now. But Walt Disney, what he wanted for the Ghostly Grotto, which is the part you're saying he would have fallen asleep on, is the plan was you would see pirates in the front door. You'd see like, oh, we're going to go see some pirates. You'd get in the Blue Bayou and you'd be like, this is scene setting. Like, oh, I wonder when the pirates are going to show up. You'd go into the Ghostly Grotto. You'd be like, oh my goodness. And then like all of a sudden there's these crew's quarters and there's the captain's quarters, but there would be no pirates there. There wasn't a plan to be skeletons there at all. You were supposed to see like hot steaming plates of food and be like, where are the pirates? Where did they go? At that point, you were still supposed to be asking that question. That was Walt Disney's intention. But then you would go through the transition tunnel, which goes under the train tracks, and then you'd open up in the Wicked Wench. You'd be like, oh, the pirates are here in the town, like attacking this town. That's where they went. So it was supposed to build suspense in that time, not just be like, these are a whole bunch of skeleton pirates. And the only reason the skeletons are there, according to John Hench, is because they got a deal on skeletons and they just started putting them everywhere. So it changed the story and made it a little more sleepy. So what Walt Disney wanted would have been different.
Wake me up when this Pirates ends. I'm just saying, dude.
It's not sleepy. Pirates is amazing in Disneyland.
Oh, my Lord. How much time do I got? Do I have an hour and a half for this attraction?
It's like 12 minutes, maybe 15 if you sit for a while. Yours is like 8. It's like 4 more minutes.
Yeah, but it's a grade 8, Kate.
The Ghostly Grotto is an amazing spot. And we have 2 drops. The 2 drops really make it.
Okay,
So don't
I will
expect
give you.
the second
I
one.
will
That's how
give
Walt
you.
Disney wanted it.
I will give you the 2 drops are epic, and I do like the transition between skeleton to like person. That's a cool scene.
Yeah.
And I do like the bar restaurant scene as well. But other than that, like especially the last scene where they're like fighting before you go up the lift hill, I think is kind of like a moot point.
Well, if you go in the one in Disneyland Paris, that scene like makes it. They made it so that scene makes so much sense there because they use that as the arsenal, so it explodes, and then you go down another drop there because it explodes.
Okay, all right. So Disneyland Paris is better than Disneyland. Got
it. No,
you just said that. You just said
I just said that that's what they do there. It's supposed to just be a silly scene, but the last scene is you going up the waterfall, and there used to be a skeleton that was like dragging a chest of gold, and so the idea was that was how the storytelling was supposed to end, is like that men tell no tales, right? But then they took that out, and now they're just like eyes creeping at you from the dark. But the original story was so good. I do have just one more kind of mention about Thunder Mesa. So they shelved Western River Expedition because of the cost of adding pirates to the park. And they figured they already had their runaway train and figured that was enough. So Thunder Mesa essentially just disappeared. And somebody pitched the project as an expansion idea in 1978. You'll like this, Kirk, as part of a Land of Legends adjacent to a Windwagon Smith and Ichabod Crane dark ride, but nothing came of it. So that was supposed to happen, potentially, 1978. Sorry, I know this is all very painful for you.
I'm still here for it.
But, as Tony Baxter said, no good idea really dies in Imagineering, just goes on the shelf. So even though the scale of Thunder Mesa project felt impossible and out of budget and is not ever possible to do, years later, they did create a very similar kind of feeling in it in Radiator Springs in Disney's California Adventure, where they created a tribute to Monument Valley in a massive, immersive environment with a whole mountain range. So this did kind of end up coming back in that way, even though it was tied to a different IP. And Tony Baxter also brought Thunder Mesa to Disneyland Paris, which we won't talk about here because we'll have to talk about that when we get to the episode about their Big Thunder Mountain Railroad.
But if you can't wait, you can always go back to our Haunted Mansion Disneyland Paris version because we actually go into great deal about Thunder Mesa.
Yeah, Phantom Manor. We have a whole series on Phantom Manor in case you're interested in that, which was said to have been kind of an apology of sorts for creating a cheaper version of Thunder Mesa that ended Marc's concept. So the idea of him putting Thunder Mesa in Disneyland Paris was maybe like, apologizing for what happened. Every time I hear Tony Baxter talk about this, he does seem very sad that this concept got lost, and it seems like he really did love all of the Western River stuff. It doesn't seem like it was ever his intention to like steal the project away and cancel Marc Davis's concepts. But
that looks like a guy who stole ideas and concepts, but I'm not sure.
He looks very diabolical in that picture.
Doesn't he, dude? Look at him. He's like, man, this is great. It's so easy when you just take somebody's stuff.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Which, another thing that also happened, as a side note, is Tony also worked on the Splash Mountain project, which poached all the audio animatronics from America Sings, which was another Marc Davis attraction. So it seems like a lot of the things he made, Marc Davis created, Tony ended up with and made it different. And so I could see how Marc Davis could be a little bit miffed about that, to put it nicely. There is rumors that Marc Davis stopped associating with Tony Baxter after the Phantom Manor's Phantom Canyon scene, which resembled the Western River Expedition, which I think honestly was trying to be Tony adding some of that to the parks.
I'm not going to lie. I actually think that Tony has stolen everything now, and I need to talk to him. Dude, could you imagine if you had a conversation with him? That's got to be like, that would be a peak moment.
I have questions. That, and I want to ask him about Rule 42 in Alice in Wonderland and why they changed it for the attraction. Thank you. Yeah. Because why is Rule 42 not what it is in the book and the movie? It's the Queen always wins.
Because Marc Davis didn't make it. So he was like, wait, I got to grab it from somewhere else.
Yeah. If I ever get to meet Tony, I'm going to ask him that question because I really want to know the answer to that. The only thing that Marc Davis ever said about Phantom Manor was Walt would never approve of it. So it seems to be there's a little bit of truth about maybe he was a little bit miffed about some of this stuff happening. So at this point, Thunder Mesa is gone as a whole big concept. Big Thunder Mountain, it was on the table, but kind of shelved because of Space Mountain. But then it will come back on the table, but not for Walt Disney World. It will instead be for Disneyland. And that is where we're going to pause till next week.
Boo! Tell us more, Kate.
There's a lot of different concepts of Big Thunder because of how it went from Walt Disney World to Disneyland and then back to Walt Disney World. So there's a lot of different models for it, a few different concepts, it getting flipped around, how they had to redesign it for Disneyland versus Disney World, how the Disney World Railroad comes into play in Walt Disney World's design, and also something about the Rams, which I'm very excited to tell Kirk later on.
You know what's so cool about the Rams? They're very tricky animals.
I'll leave you with this wonderful picture from the original, kind of fun park map for Walt Disney World with Thunder Mesa just hanging out there with a little mine train on it, in ode to the runaway mine train that we never got. So that's all I have for this particular topic before we move to Disneyland. Do you have anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I found this picture. This is Tony Baxter working on another one of his creations. I'm kidding, Tony. Please don't hurt me.
He's still out there.
I know, dude. I heard everything you said.
Alrighty. Well, shall we wrap it up?
Let's pull this train right into the station.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this episode of Distory as we transition from Disneyland to Walt Disney World. Next week, we'll head back to Disneyland again as we head on to Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, of course, with a little stop at Discovery Bay, which is going to come next week as well. Kirk, do you have any final thoughts as we wrap up?
Good artists borrow, great artists steal.
Always pitch your ideas with a painting, I think is my takeaway from this one. Alrighty. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. We appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time for Distory.